Hey, DHG here, and I'm going to be giving my final rating for Clive Barker's Jericho. If you want to take a minute, go ahead and read that text there. It gives you an idea of what the game's about. Okay, and for those of you that don't read English very well, since I know some people in other countries watch me, basically what the story behind the game is God's first creation, the firstborn, according to these Gnostic texts, which is used as a backdrop for the entire story here. God's first creation, the firstborn, was so destructive and so uncontrollable, I would dare say evil, that it had to be sealed away in its own little special container, and then God created man. But every now and then, people seek to access the firstborn, usually evil people, and there's a squad of people, usually the Jericho squad. They've been called many things over the ages, going back all the way to the, I think it was the Sumerians or the Babylonians, one of the two that you get to in the game. But this 7-man squad has to go in and contain the firstborn and stop the breach from happening. If the breach happens, then the firstborn spills over into the world that we inhabit, this dimension, and all hell breaks loose. So that's a pretty cool backdrop for a story. Unfortunately, they get a lot of things wrong along the way. And in my normal fashion here, I'm going to be doing this with my pluses, my minuses, and my things that are neither really pluses or minuses. They're just kind of like observations. I've got about the same number of pluses as I do minuses, which would indicate an average game, but some things are better than others and some things are worse than others. I will get into that because that really matters. So I'm going to start off with some of the things that Jericho did good. Controls. Given that I played this on the Xbox 360, which had my 360 controllers pretty old, this game controlled very well. The thumbsticks felt right as compared to some of the games coming out nowadays that have all this extra shit built into the thumbstick responsiveness, like dead zones and anti-dead zones thresholds and all that crap. This just seemed to feel natural. A lot of games that were old before they added all this fancy crap like acceleration, they just tended to feel more natural. So the controls was something that it got right. Also, the gamepad layout also felt pretty good too, like the face buttons and what they do. There's not a whole lot to remember. It wasn't overly complex, and it worked pretty well, so that's a plus there. The graphics. This looked pretty good. This was back before most of the developers started using an anti-aliasing technique known as temporal anti-aliasing, which does a great job at removing jaggies, but it makes the games blurry as fuck. I don't like it. I don't use it unless I can have a lot of sharpening, and a lot of games don't use sharpening. This game, I'm gonna guess, being on the Xbox 360 in the early days, probably used multi-sampling, probably ×2 MSAA. That gives it a very sharp look. And the graphics from start to finish, like the blood glistens in a very creepy way, almost kind of like Bloodborne. They did a pretty good job with the graphics. Gotta give them credit where credit's due. The environment. Let me move forward a little bit here. Okay, this is pretty standard stuff for the environment. Let me get into another episode here. As you can see, there's nothing but gore everywhere. And this sets the stage for how a lot of the battlefields end up looking through in the stages that you play through. The closer you get to the end of the game and where the firstborn's being held in this interdimensional kind of like lockbox that they call the Pixis, the closer you get, the more violent the games become. I've played a lot of violent games. It's not really the action that's violent in this, it's the surroundings. This game is extremely violent. Its environments are like nightmarish type shit, which is why I included it in Halloween Horror. So they got the environment good. Music and ambient sound, there's not a lot in the way of music. So when it does pop up, it usually does its job and enhances the scene, provides a little support to the visuals. Ambient music. I played through this a couple weeks ago, but I do remember some of the ambient music being very creepy. Usually the sounds of the firstborn from time to time popping up in weird places. An overall story, which I already gave you a pretty good indication of what's going on here. I'm not going to go through that again. So the overall story was a plus, but I gotta add this caveat here. Minus the ending. I'll get into that later in the negatives, because it's a big one. Okay, things that are neither really here or there. They're just some observations. The banter between the characters. Since you are in a nominally a 7-man squad, your leader Ross gets killed off right in the beginning. He gets killed off by the main protagonist, other than the firstborn, a guy called Arnold Leach. He kills Ross, and Ross becomes like this kind of interdimensional spirit that can jump from person to person, which is what it's what you're seeing right now. I can get into each and every single one of those characters that's on screen that's not an enemy. It leads to some interesting encounters, or it could have if they had done some things better. So the banter's pretty good. The one dude, Delgado, the big Hispanic dude that's got the minigun on his arm and the fire demon, he pops a lot of jokes about black being a lesbian, which I thought they were pretty damn funny. And then there's the checkpoint system. The checkpoints, neither here or there. Some of the checkpoint systems are great, like they place checkpoints right before the really annoying minigames this game has. But then there's other instances where you go for an alarming amount of time without a checkpoint, and you have to, especially on some of the single-player levels. I'll get into that later. The squad play is interesting, but half-baked. That pretty much sums up most of the game. Half-baked. I mean, they could have done some more cool stuff here. I could really elaborate more on why I thought the squad play was interesting, but half-baked, but that would really get into where the negatives come in, so I'll leave it at that. Controls are unresponsive at times. Not your joysticks. They always respond. What I'm talking about are the face buttons, like when you're trying to press on the D-pad. Of course, this might have been a fault with the 360 controller. Its D-pad was terrible. But some of the other buttons on the face, like the shoulder buttons or maybe A, B, Y, X, any of them, sometimes they just don't feel like they respond. Like commands, more of a suggestion. Characters are average. There's not really any characters in the game you're going to be able to relate to any real degree. They're just characters. I mean, they're there. So I say they're average. They're not really cringe-worthy, but they're not really people that you can empathize with either. And here's something that I added in here, which just kind of had me scratching my head. Later on in the game, once you get to like this level here, which is in Rome, and once you get it a little further on in the next stage, which I think is the Sumerian era, Rawlings, he's kind of like the main dude in the squad. He's not the commander, but he's somehow the ranking officer. I don't really understand how that works in this game. But he's privy to a lot of information the rest of the squad isn't. And when he's... In fact, I might be able to get back to it here. Okay, here. This was part of the past Jericho squads. And Jones is talking to this guy, and Rollins is talking through Jones to this old Centurion dude that used to be one of the Jericho squad way back when. And he keeps talking about, right here, this is the conversation. Something the firstborn wants to stop the cycle. They never really explain what that is. What I mean by break the cycle, that means next time someone wants to use the firstborn to gain power, then the Jericho squad's going to have to go in again, and they could find a way to end it if they could find out what the firstborn wants, but they never really say what that is. They don't really hint as to it either, so that was something that really bothered me. They didn't do a good job wrapping the end of this game up, which is something I'll get into later. Okay, now we're getting into the stuff that you might want to know. How bad is it? Let's talk about the bad things. The story ending. Oh my god. I don't think... Well, let's just see. Out of all the games I've played through, all the way to the end, and there's been quite a bit of them, this might be the worst. That's saying a lot. This game had an ending that was so bad. The first time I played through it back in like 2007, I just kind of sat there in awe with my jaw hanging wide open, like, really? All this for that? I could show you what the ending is, but it doesn't really give you the same effect as if you playing through the game the whole way and really wanted to... You expect some sort of like a crescendo or something to happen at the end. You get nothing. It's just nothing. It's a horrible nothing ending. It's not even one of those stupid, ambiguous, like, you get to guess what happens at the end, like how they wrapped up the Lost series. It's not even that. It's nothing. It's quite literally one of the biggest narrative failures I've ever seen. It sucks. Terrible. Worst story ever. Or at least I should say the worst story ending ever. The rest of the story is pretty compelling. The AI is brain dead. Yeah, that they are. And that doesn't really help when you have a lot of one-hit kill creatures running around. Not the guys that we're looking at here, but occasionally these dudes spawn that got these like pustules all over their body. They walk up to the squad members and just blow up. Or they'll blow up if you damage them when you get too close. But these one-hit killers are everywhere, and for being a squad-based game, you have to have some sort of a competent AI. I went through this. I didn't do an oral review, I did a written one for Demon's Stone, where I quit playing the game just because the AI was so bad, and you need a competent AI to get through that game. AI in this game's pretty brain dead too. They walk right up the fire, they don't listen to the orders you give them, they just kind of stand there. If you tell them to stay put, they'll walk like way ahead of you, but if you tell them to move on, they'll stay there. AI's brain dead. It's pretty much what you see here is what you end up doing, babysitting the squad the whole time. It gets kind of irritating. Minigames. Oh, there's plenty of minigames. At least they put a checkpoint right before the minigame, because even though the minigames suck, it could have been a lot worse if the checkpoint was like 10 minutes ago. You got the solo missions here. Ah, this is the Roman level, so that's the one that has Delgado's little solo section here. Okay, so this is one of the solo sections you have to go through. You're separated from the rest of the squad. You have to manage all these creatures on your own. And what makes it worse is I was talking about the instant kill enemies. There's one of them right there. In some of these single player parts, you're just surrounded by the insta kill enemies, like this one right here. They just keep spawning. You must kill like 4 or 5 dozen of them here. It's ridiculous, and each time you die, you have to start from the beginning. It gets horribly, horribly tedious and horribly irritating. These little single player parts should never have been in the game. Insta-death enemies everywhere. Yes, I've already mentioned that, but that is a point worth repeating because they're in every episode, I should say every period of time since you start off in modern day, then you go back to World War II. Then before that you go to the Crusades, and then after that you're in the Roman period, and then you're in Sumerian, I think. Insta-death enemies are everywhere. The other enemies change though. But those insta-death explodey dudes, yeah, they're a constant annoyance for your squad. Puzzles. Oh, yes, the game's puzzles. How could I forget them? Another bad thing about this game. The puzzles are terrible, especially when it comes to the little astral projection puzzles. The rest of the puzzles aren't that bad. But when it comes to astral projection, using Jones to open up certain doors by getting into other people's bodies, they don't really give you a clear indication as to what you're looking for. Usually it's some sort of an obscure lever that's off to the side and very, very easy to miss. So you'll stand there looking around for like 20 minutes, wondering what the hell it is you're supposed to be doing, and then you come across it and you're like, really? So given all the above, and saying some things are worse than others, like I said, this is probably the worst game ending I've ever seen, period. I mean, definitely top 3, but it could take the cake for the worst game ending ever. Yeah, I would say this definitely deserves a bad rating, because there are some good things, like it does have a unique, creepy, and compelling environment. The story starts off really cool, although, the end. And it can be a little bit of fun to play. It's worth exploring just to see what could have been if they ever decided to try to do a game like this again, like a collaborative effort between a master of horror like Clive Barker, let's say John Carpenter wanted to get together with the old team that made the Silent Hill games, Team Silent. Like if they teamed up to make something, they could play this and learn a hell of a lot from it. But overall, even for the compelling atmosphere, all the gore, the game's bad. It's just bad. It's not terrible, but it's bad.